do you find that there's different, I mean, and you obviously work in your business with other interpreters, do you find that there's a difference in style, and perhaps a difference in some interpreters are better suited in different situations?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. There are different styles. There's different capabilities, obviously, because it's something that we're always learning. I'm still learning, still the profession of 25 years. And so that's why we set up Connect Interpreting, which is our company, which was around supporting new graduates into the profession, while also making sure that the selection of interpreters was more carefully matched to the demands of the job. So there's different styles and skill levels, and we try and support interpreters to constantly improve those skills so they can, get more work and provide better services to the community. In terms of the job that we do, we try and put our own style and personality to the side as much as possible.
Okay.
Because it's hard enough for one person to talk to another person through a third party and be confident that the message that they're receiving from that third party, the interpreter, is actually what that person's saying.
Yes.
So if they're picking up from the interpreter that there's a bit of frustration, a little bit of impatience, is that the person I'm talking to, or is that the interpreter because they couldn't get parking in time, or they've had a bad morning? It can easily be obscured. So you need to be as transparent and invisible as possible, really.
That's really interesting. So in that sense, do you then sort of almost try and emotionally pick up on where the person you're interpreting, so say you're interpreting a speaking person, a hearing person, do you try and pick up on emotionally where they're at? Because obviously that comes through in their words and the way that they're holding themselves.
Yeah.
Is that something you're conveying kind of in the context?
We should do, we should do that.
I think that's an interesting concept, is that they're actually focusing on you, essentially, and there might be things that they miss about the person they're trying to communicate with.
Exactly. So there's the physical dynamics of interpreting between deaf and hearing people have an impact on their perception of each other. The reason being is that while a hearing person is talking, the deaf person has to look at the interpreter.
Yes.
Which is unusual, because usually you imagine a job interview, and I'm interpreting for a deaf person who's applying for a job.
Yes.
All right. So I'm seated next to the interviewer, and when they're asking their question, the deaf person has to look at me, which is not great for a job interview, because you really want that eye contact, you want that connection.
Yeah.
So we have to try and manage that best we can. So while the deaf person is looking at me to get the message coming from the hearing person, I then need to try and reenact that person's manner as much as possible, so that the deaf person's aware of really what's going on in the interview. Because the interview itself, it's a fact-finding thing, but mostly it's do I like this person?
Yes.
Do I like this workplace? Will they be open to me? So all those kind of things that are going on beneath the form of the language, you need to try and get across as well.
So do you do that through sort of facial expressions, or the way that you gesture, or what are you? How are you trying to convey that to?
So in that instance, but the tricky thing is that we're having to sort of make our own judgments and assessments in order to turn it into specific actions. Because hearing people and deaf people use body language in quite different ways. And so there's ample space for misunderstanding. One of the biggest ones, obviously, is if a hearing person is unfamiliar with how deaf people communicate, then particularly in a small interview room, having a person in front of them waving their arms around and sometimes vocalizing noise anyway is alarming, a little bit threatening. Even on a subconscious level, it's kind of, oh my God, there's a person right in front of me waving their arms around. Am I feeling threatened? Should I run? And so you have to make sure that bias is mitigated by the way that you voice that person's signing. So even though the person themselves might look quite animated
Yeah.
and be making some noises anyway, which is just a normal part of their communication, you need to make sure that the way that you're voicing, the tone, the prosody and everything is as accurate to that person as possible. If anything, it's a little on the lower side. It's a little on the calmer side, because you're expecting this hearing person's already going to have a heightened view of how this person is communicating, or what their personality is like.
Yes.
Because they're waving their arms around at the end of the table.
Yes.
So if you try and match that, it's going to be a disaster. So you have to try and, ideally, by the end of the interview, the hearing person has an accurate view of that applicant's manner and personality. So you have to be mindful of what you're expecting them to be picking up directly and mixing it in with what you're giving them in terms of a spoken message.
So would that be, in your face, or would it be in your body? Or what?
If it's from signing to spoken English, then it's generally in vocal tone. So you need to make sure that the way that you're interpreting is, measured and mannered and accurate.
Yes.
And the other way around, hearing person talking and the deaf person watching me, then it is through expression and body movement. You're basically, it's like impromptu acting, basically. You're being fed your lines as you're doing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Quite an art form, I'd say. One thing to act, quite a different thing to improvise act. It's, really there in the moment, on the spot. So would you say that, as far as sort of difference in the language, and you were talking about sort of difference in body language, and I would count sort of tone and speed and of words as part of body language to me, rather than, would you say that, in the hearing world, we use body language in a much more subdued way, where you're actually, and like you say, a lot of it comes through you sort of hinted at different use of body language. What could you sort of say a little bit more about that?
I think so. I think perhaps hearing people are a little bit more. It's a generalisation. There's such variation, I know, but typically you might think that a hearing person is a little bit more measured and a little bit more contained, because the language encourages containment, I think. My familiarity with both languages just means that I can see the differences, and when I'm using English,
but I think that's why
I feel more contained. I'm still using my hands when I'm doing it anyway, because I'm visual, but it just feels more limited in terms of body language. There's still going to be, gross movements, folding your arms and this kind of thing, leaning forward. Those things are going to be apparent.
Yes.
But the nuances are a lot more difficult to pick up, I think, for a deaf person that's already using their body to communicate linguistically. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to pick up because they're just so attuned at using, eye contact, eye gaze, facial expression. It's all so measured, deliberate, and skillful that you get a lot of information. Often the issue for interpreters isn't is as much what we don't need to interpret as what we do, because you're getting so much information from both participants.
Yes.
When you're open and aware to it, there's just a flood of information.
Yes.
And you just can't get it all across.
No.
So let's say I was interpreting a university lecture, and the lecturer was very knowledgeable, very articulate, but a bit monotonous, not very inspiring.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily make sure that my interpretation was monotonous and uninspiring, because that's not the purpose of me being there.
No.
I might mention it particularly if it became apparent in a group. So let's say someone next to the deaf person said to them, "Oh, here we go again," whatever.
Yeah.
I might suggest that was the meaning of that comment. That they're a little bit hard to listen to for an hour. It's a little bit flat. Oh, okay, fine. But I don't need to get that across any more than that, because my focus in that moment is making the information as clear as possible. And it's complex information, because it's by definition it's going to be new information to the student. So that's my focus. So all my attention is on making the message as clear as possible. It's not necessarily worrying about the body language or the speaking style of the lecturer.
Because it's not relevant.
Because it's not relevant. It's there, it's information, but it's not inaccurate to ignore that in favour of the message itself. So you're constantly switching between, you're trying to figure out within an interaction what you need to be focusing on and what you can try and ignore. So in a job interview, it's a lot about interaction and personality and the way people communicate and things like that.
Yes.
In a lecture, it's the opposite.
Yes.